Todd Prescott with the Sasquatch Archives. It's December 15th, which means it's day 15 of Squatchmas. That means that we're almost halfway through the month. I do hope you're enjoying the videos thus far. Day 18, we're going to feature a rare magazine that few will have seen, yet it's a magazine that is often referenced and cited in many books and many magazine articles. And the magazine, as you can see from the cover, is West Magazine, and it was put out by the Los Angeles Times, and it's from December 1968. And there you can see the cover, and the second item on the cover shows the title, Chasing America's Abominable Snowman. And if we look at the table of contents, we'll see that on page 24, there is a Bigfoot article titled This is Bigfoot by James B. Schumann, and the following byline is stated. For nigh unto 49 years, hunters and trappers have been running across evidence of a monster, something out there in the northwest wilds. Some of the evidence has been pretty persuasive. Schumann is a freelance writer who visited the Bigfoot hunting grounds. And when we open up the magazine, you can see the article here. It's called This is Bigfoot, and on the left side you will see some stills from the Patterson-Gimlin film, including the infamous pose of Patty that made its way into many magazines and books and of course documentaries. And when we take a look under the film still of Patty on the left side, it says the following. These blow-ups of frames from Roger Patterson's 16mm film show a creature, thought to be Bigfoot, ambling beside a creek near Eureka, California. Footprints indicate it weighed 600 to 700 pounds. Now let's take a look at what Schumann has written. It was in the middle of the night, and I was groggy with sleep. 75-year-old Al Osman recalls. Something big and powerful grabbed my sleeping bag and me inside of it and lifted me off the ground. I reached for my sheath knife and couldn't get at it. The beast, or whatever it was, threw me over its shoulder like a sack of flour. I could feel it striding on two legs, like a giant gorilla. Osman, a husky logger looking for gold in British Columbia in 1924, estimates that he was carried bodily across wild and rugged terrain for 3 hours. We went up and down steep hills. The thing carrying me was breathing hard, sometimes coughing. When we got to level ground, it would break into a trot. I was too scared to struggle. Finally, we stopped and it dropped me on the ground. In the dim light of dawn, Osman gazed up at a group of creatures circling him and chattering unintelligibly. I had never believed in the Indian legends of Sasquatch, Osman says, but I knew that's what they were. Evidently a family. They looked like a cross between a man and an ape. Their bodies were covered with hair. They had bulging muscles, and their forearms were longer than a man's, but well proportioned. They were bigger and taller than human beings. The old man must have been nearly 8 feet tall, the old lady over 7. For 6 days I was held captive in a bowl-shaped valley with one exit, a narrow pass through tall rocks. Only in the confusion that followed after one became violently ill from swallowing an entire tin of snuff I had been using, I was able to escape. Understandably reticent, Osman at first told no one of his bizarre adventure until 1957. But when newspapers in California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia published stories of others who claimed to have seen the legendary Sasquatch, he came forth to add another chapter to one of the world's most intriguing mysteries, the question of whether there exists in the Pacific Northwest a subhuman creature, perhaps an American cousin of the famed, elusive, abominable snowman of the Himalayas. Like that fabled snowman, such a hominid could be a link between man and ape, a vital piece in the puzzle of man's evolution. For more than a century, scores of eyewitnesses have told of seeing these giant ape-like creatures and their unique oversized footprints. Some measure 16 inches and more in length in the remote and rumpled mountain areas of the Pacific Northwest. Indians fear them and call them by many names: Oma, Bakwas, Tokamasai, Hakuyam, Sioma, to mention a few. In Canada, they are generally called Sasquatch, an English version of an Indian name. In the United States, many call them Bigfoot. Although stories of Sasquatch sightings and footprints are remarkably consistent and similar, they have been so separated in time and location that there could be little chance of people working together to perpetrate a hoax. Evidence often appears in remote areas, deep in the mountains or along hidden streams where there could be little expectation that someone would pass through. No one knows how many people believe they have actually seen a Sasquatch or even its footprints, for they are reluctant to talk about it. "You say you've seen one, and everybody says you're crazy," one man explained. "It's better just to keep your mouth shut." But John Green, editor, publisher of The Advance, the newspaper serving the Agassiz-Harrison Lake area of British Columbia, has collected more than 250 reports of sightings, photographs of footprints and other evidence, which cover an area from Alaska to Mexico and from the Pacific coast to northern Michigan. Like many others, Green started as a scoffer, but he changed to a believer as evidence mounted. Here is a partial sample of that evidence. The Daily British Colonist, published in Victoria, BC, reported that on June 30th, 1884, the crew of a train running from Lytton to Yale, about 100 miles east of Vancouver, had captured a creature who may truly be called half man and half beast, which had apparently been asleep near the tracks. He had long, black, strong hair and resembles a human being, with one exception, the report said. His entire body, excepting his hands or paws and feet, are covered with glossy hair about 1 inch long. His forearm is much longer than a man's forearm, and he possesses extraordinary strength. He will take hold of a stout stick and break it by rending and twisting it. No man living could break it in the same way. The colonist said that George Tilbury of Yale proposed to exhibit the creature, whom the railway crew named Jacko. But there are no further details. Jacko was exhibited in Yale. Beyond that, no one has been able to find out what happened to him. In 1900, 4 prospectors discovered gold in southwestern Alaska, near Wrangel Island. They went into the area alone and in pairs, and each said he was chased or frightened away by a band of hideous creatures. They were neither men nor monkeys, yet looked like both, one of the prospectors said. They appeared to be sexless, their bodies covered with long, coarse hair. In 1901, Mike King, a timber cruiser, said that he had seen a man-beast covered with reddish-brown hair washing roots in a waterhole on Vancouver Island. It had particularly long arms, which it used freely in climbing. Its trail showed a distinctly human footprint with very long, spready toes. Charles Flood, a resident of New Westminster, BC, said in 1915 that he saw a hairy, ape-like creature, which he estimated to be 8 feet tall. It was standing in a berry patch, pulling bushes towards itself with one hand and putting berries in its mouth with the other. In July 1924, near Mount St. Helens, in what is now the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest of Washington, 5 prospectors said that their cabin was attacked by a band of giant man-apes that hurled tremendous boulders onto the roof and screamed in loud, hideous wails. The men said the giants, apparently angered by the fact that the men had shot and perhaps killed 2 of their band, also tried to force the cabin door open by ramming it with their bodies. A posse of lawmen and reporters found the cabin badly damaged and hundreds of giant human-like footprints all around it. The area came to be called Ape Canyon, and scores of people have since reported seeing the man-apes in the vicinity. Several men have disappeared there mysteriously, leaving no trace. One mid-afternoon in September 1941 at Ruby Creek, about 30 miles up the Fraser River from Agassiz, BC, Mrs. George Chapman saw a large man-like animal emerge from the woods. She and her 3 children fled from their home in terror. Her husband and friends from the village found evidence that the creature had entered a shed and scattered about some salt fish from a barrel. It left huge footprints. The Chapmans moved to another house. Donald Hunter, now head of the Audiovisual Media Center at the University of Oregon, on a camping trip with his wife in 1942, reports they both saw a large man-like animal at Todd Lake in the Oregon Cascades. It appeared to be about 9 feet tall, stood erect, and walked on 2 legs. It strolled into the woods when it saw the hunters. In October 1955, William Rowe of Edmonton, Canada, was hunting on Meeka Mountain near the village of Tejon-Cache in British Columbia when he saw an upright figure only 75 yards away. "At first I thought it was a huge grizzly bear," he said, "but I didn't want to shoot it, for I had no way of getting it out. When the animal came closer, I saw it wasn't a bear. My first impression was of a huge man, about 6 feet tall, almost 3 feet wide, and weighing perhaps 300 pounds. It was covered from head to foot with dark brown, silver-tipped hair. The thought came to me that if I shot it, I would possibly have a specimen of great interest to scientists the world over. I leveled my rifle. The creature was now walking rapidly away, turning its head to look in my direction. I lowered the rifle. I felt now that it was a human being, and I knew I would never forgive myself if I killed it. Rose said he later found a place where the creature had slept for a couple of nights under a tree. It had not used a fire, he said, and I found no signs that it possessed even the simplest of tools. Other, less subjective evidence has been collected over the years in the form of hair and droppings. Scientists who have analyzed hair samples say they come from no known animals. The droppings, human-like in form but large enough to come from a huge horse, contain vegetable matter and the hair of small rodents. No Bigfoot bodies have been found, but nature disposes quickly of dead animals. Perhaps the most impressive evidence is a 16mm color movie made in 1967 by Roger Patterson, a 34-year-old Yakima, Washington rancher. 2 years before, Patterson had written a book, Do Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist? A collection of reports he had gathered since first hearing of Bigfoot. Patterson was convinced that the only way to prove the existence of these animals was to get clear photographs. In October 1967, a friend called Patterson to tell him there were fresh tracks at Bluff Creek in Northern California. Patterson and another friend, Bob Gimlin, an experienced tracker, set out to find the animals. They scouted the area on horseback for a week and a half. They saw tracks of varying sizes, indicating the presence of a Bigfoot family. Early in the afternoon of October 20, Patterson and Gimlin decided to ride up the creek. The wind, Patterson recalls, was blowing down the canyon, and his horse was skittish. He pricked up his ears a little bit, Patterson told me. Something was bothering him, but I couldn't tell what it was. Soon they came to a bend in the creek where a gigantic stump, overturned by a flood, obscured the view ahead. Patterson's horse stopped and snorted. Patterson saw something out of the corner of his eye, but before he could look, the horse reared, then fell on its side. Moments later, when Patterson went around the front of the horse to grab the dangling reins, he saw what had startled it. This creature was on my left, about 125 feet across the creek, he recalls. Its head was very human, though considerably more slanted and with a large forehead and wide, continued on page 29, broad nostrils. Its arms hung almost to its knees when it walked. Its hair was 2 to 4 inches long, brown underneath, lighter at the top, and covering the entire body, except for the face around the nose, mouth, and cheek. And it was a female. It had big, pendulous breasts. Patterson reached into his saddlebag, grabbed his movie camera. The creature, meanwhile, was walking across a sandbar toward the hillside. It didn't seem real startled, like it had seen people before, like we weren't anything extra special, Patterson told me. He began trotting after it, shooting pictures as he forded the creek. At one point, the creature turned and stared at Patterson and the camera. Curious, like it wondered what was making that noise, Patterson says. Then it went into the woods, up a steep hill and out of sight. Gimlin began to give chase, but Patterson, who had used all of his film, told him to stop. It kind of spooked me, he says. I didn't want to be there alone without a weapon. Next, Patterson and Gimlin made plaster casts of the 14.5-inch footprints and covered some of the prints with bark to preserve them. 9 days later, Robert Titmus, a former taxidermist who lives in Kitimat, BC, followed the footprints further. Titmus has studied Sasquatch intensively since 1958, and he considers himself an expert at spotting the occasional hoax. The reports of sightings that don't ring true, the alleged footprints made mechanically that show no variation step to step, and are often of only a right or left foot. I knew if there was any hocus pocus about the Patterson film, Titmus told me, the tracks would tell. He spent hours examining and taking plaster casts of the huge footprints. They were still in good condition, especially the ones Patterson and Gimlin had covered with slabs of bark. I took plaster casts of 10 consecutive footprints, Titmus said, and the casts show a vast difference in each print, such as toe placement, toe gripping, force, weight shifts, weight distribution, depth, and so on. No amount of thinking or imagining on my part could conceive of a method by which these tracks could have been faked. Titmus's brother-in-law, a skeptic, made a test of his own. He tried to duplicate the depth of the prints with his own feet. The best his 200 pounds could do was make an imprint of 1/4 inch at the heel, 7/8 of an inch less than the print overall. We agreed, Titmus says, that the creature that made those tracks would have to weigh at least 600 or 700 pounds. The footprints, pressed deep into the hillside, continued up to a level space, then circled round to a spot overlooking the creek. There, Titmus found broken ferns, smashed down underbrush, and depressions made by the creature's buttocks. It sat on that hillside about 125 yards away and about 70 or 80 feet above Patterson and Gimlin, perfectly screened from their view, Titmus surmised, and watched as they made the plaster casts of its footprints. Patterson, meanwhile, was showing the film to scientists on both coasts, hoping to interest someone in a full-scale expedition to capture a living specimen. The somewhat blurred 29-foot segment shows a creature walking away with a man-like stride, swinging enormous arms. Although some scientists immediately branded the creature in the film a hoax, questioning the man-like fluidity of its movements, others kept an open mind. Donald Abbott, anthropologist on the staff of the Provincial Museum in Victoria, BC, told me he had entered the investigation as a skeptic. He now says, if the evidence of which I am aware has been the work of hoaxers, it would be one of the most elaborate hoaxes ever perpetuated. I find this possibility almost as incredible as that of the existence of such a creature. The presence of unknown humanoid creatures in the Pacific Northwest, said Dr. R. Napier, director of the Smithsonian Institution's Primate Biology Department, is a possibility that should not be discounted. After all, scientific annals are littered with the tarnished reputations of those who dismissed initial reports of the existence of the giant squid, the gorilla, the okapi, and the giant panda. And an unclassified animal could be prowling the Pacific Northwest. So rugged is the 150,000 square mile area in which sightings of Bigfoot have been reported that major sections have never really been penetrated. In Washington, Oregon, and California, there are 70,000 square miles of national forest, an area equal to the entire state of Missouri. And for some sections, the only maps are those based on aerial surveys. Even power lines, which usually stride across any obstacle, are largely absent despite the nearness of such huge federal power projects as Bonneville Dam. British Columbia is even less developed. Nearly 250,000 square miles of its total area, a region almost the size of Texas, has only one main road and a handful of small villages. It is the kind of wilderness in which animals with only normal cunning easily remain out of sight of man. Forest Service officials estimate, for example, that hundreds of cougars prowl there, yet they can be very elusive. I've lived and hunted in these forests for 44 years and have seen only 2 young ones. Pat Ford, reservoir superintendent of the Cle Elum Dam, Washington, told me. Roger Patterson, financed by $75,000 from the Northwest Research Association, Yakima, Washington, a maker of documentary movies, is continuing his search. This time he is using lures, dogs, and tranquilizer guns, hoping to capture a living specimen. Meanwhile, an autumn hunter, less squeamish than Roe about killing something so human, may stumble across one, shoot it and bring it in, or perhaps, like the elusive abominable snowman of the Himalayas, this mysterious American will continue to avoid capture. Others have tried before to capture a Bigfoot without success. The most notable was Tom Slick, the Texan oil man who mounted an expedition shortly before his death in 1962, after being convinced that there was as much evidence for the abominable snowman in North America as he had found in 2 expeditions to the Himalayas. If such an animal exists and is caught, Dr. W.C. Osmond Hill of the Yerkes Center at Emory University in Atlanta has said, it could well be one of the most important finds in history.
Please support this channel by subscribing and leaving comments. Stay well, stay safe. Here's wishing each and every one of you a wonderful holiday season. Merry Squatchmas, everyone!